The Arizona sun was brutal that afternoon, the kind of heat that makes the road shimmer and dance in front of your eyes. David Chen had been driving for hours, his old Honda packed with camera equipment, notebooks, and a cooler that had long since run out of ice. He was 28 years old, working on his doctorate in anthropology, and honestly, he was starting to wonder if this whole research trip was a mistake. For the past 3 months, David had been traveling across the Southwest, visiting different Native American communities, conducting interviews, and documenting traditions that were slowly fading away. It was important work, or at least that's what his professors kept telling him. But right now, tired and sweaty and low on funds, he just wanted to finish up and go home. He was driving through a particularly empty stretch of highway near the San Carlos Apache reservation when he saw her. An elderly woman stood next to a beaten-up pickup truck on the side of the road, waving her arms. David's first instinct was to keep driving. He'd been warned about stopping for strangers, about scams and dangerous situations, but something about the scene didn't feel right to ignore. The woman looked genuinely distressed, and there wasn't another car in sight. David slowed down and pulled over. As he got out, the heat hit him like a physical force. The woman was probably in her 60s, with long gray hair tied back and deep lines around her eyes that spoke of a lifetime spent under this same sun. She was wearing a simple cotton dress and looked exhausted. "Thank you for stopping," she said, her voice hoarse. "My tire went flat about an hour ago. I've been trying to change it, but..." She gestured toward the truck. David walked over and immediately saw the problem. Not only was the tire completely shredded, but she didn't have a spare. The spare tire holder under the truck bed was empty. "Do you have a phone?" David asked. "We can call someone." The woman shook her head. "No signal out here. Never has been. I was heading into town when this happened. Still got about 40 miles to go." David looked around at the empty landscape. Nothing but desert scrub and distant mountains. The next car might not come along for hours. He thought about his schedule, about the interview he had planned for tomorrow in a town 2 hours away. Then he looked at the woman again, saw the worry in her eyes, and made his decision. "Come on," he said. "I'll drive you into town. We'll get you a new tire." The woman's face flooded with relief. "Are you sure? That's a long way to go out of your way." "It's fine," David said, and he meant it. "Can't just leave you out here." Her name was Grace Blackfeather, she told him as they drove. She lived on the reservation and had been visiting a friend when her tire gave out. She was a widow, had 3 grown children, and had lived in this area her entire life. David found himself genuinely interested in her stories. She told him about how the land had changed over the years, about the struggles her community faced, about the young people who left and never came back. "You're not from around here," Grace observed. "What brings you to this part of the world?" David explained his research, his dissertation on cultural preservation in indigenous communities. Grace listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions. She seemed impressed by his work, but also slightly amused, as if she could see something about him that he couldn't see himself. When they reached the town, David didn't just drop her off. He took her to an auto shop, waited while they found the right tire, and when she started digging through her purse for money, he quietly handed his credit card to the mechanic. The tire cost $85, money David really couldn't spare from his tight research budget. But he did it anyway. "You don't have to do that," Grace protested. "It's already done," David said with a smile. "Consider it an investment in good karma." They drove back to her truck together. The sun was starting to set now, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. David helped install the new tire, getting his hands dirty and sweating through his shirt. When they were finished, Grace gripped his hand firmly. "You're a good man, David Chen," she said, looking him straight in the eye. "Not many people would have stopped today. Even fewer would have stayed to help. I won't forget this. It's really not a big deal," David said, embarrassed by the gratitude in her voice. "It is to me," Grace insisted. "If you're ever back this way, you come find me, you hear?" Grace Blackfeather. "Anyone on the reservation can tell you where I live." David nodded, though he figured he'd probably never see her again. He had only a few more weeks left in his research trip, and then he'd be heading back to Boston to write his dissertation. This area of Arizona would just become a memory, a chapter in his thesis. As he drove away, watching Grace's truck disappear in his rearview mirror, David felt oddly good about himself. Maybe the research wasn't going as planned. Maybe his funding was running low and his advisor was getting impatient. But today at least he'd done something that mattered. He'd helped someone who needed it. No strings attached, no expectation of anything in return. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would completely change the course of his life. That 6 months from now, he'd be back on this same stretch of highway, broke and desperate, his academic dreams crumbling around him, and that Grace Blackfeather would remember him, just as she'd promised. Sometimes life works in mysterious ways. Sometimes the universe keeps track of the good things we do, storing them up like deposits in a cosmic bank account. And sometimes, when we least expect it, we get a return on those investments that we never could have imagined. But David didn't know any of that yet. Right now, he was just a tired graduate student driving through the desert, feeling slightly better about the world than he had that morning. The sun set completely. Stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, and David continued on his journey, unaware that he'd just planted a seed that would bloom into something extraordinary. 6 months had passed since that day on the highway, and David's life had fallen apart in ways he never could have predicted. His research funding had been cut. His advisor had basically told him his dissertation wasn't strong enough, and the university had given him an ultimatum: produce something publishable by the end of the semester, or lose his spot in the doctoral program. David had spent those 6 months driving across the Southwest again, desperately trying to salvage his research. He'd conducted more interviews, taken thousands of photos, filled notebook after notebook with observations. But somehow it all felt hollow. His thesis was supposed to be about cultural preservation, but he was starting to realize he didn't really understand what that meant. He was an outsider looking in, writing academic papers about people's lives without truly connecting to anything. Now his money had completely run out. His credit cards were maxed. He had maybe $200 left in his checking account, barely enough for gas to get back to Boston. His car was making a strange rattling noise that probably meant expensive repairs he couldn't afford. And he hadn't eaten anything but gas station sandwiches and instant ramen for the past 2 weeks. He found himself driving through that same area near the San Carlos Apache reservation, not for any research reason, but simply because it was on his route back east. He needed to stop for supplies, maybe stretch his legs before the long drive home to face his failures. There was a small trading post along the highway, one of those places that sold a bit of everything: groceries, souvenirs, fishing supplies, and probably lottery tickets. David pulled in, his car coughing as he turned off the engine. He went inside, grabbed a bottle of water and some beef jerky, trying to calculate if he could afford both and still have enough money for gas. He was standing at the counter when he heard it. David Chen?" He turned around, confused. He didn't know anyone in this area. And then he saw her. Grace Blackfeather was standing near the door, holding a bag of groceries, staring at him with wide eyes. "Grace," David said, genuinely surprised. "Wow, hi." She walked over quickly, a huge smile spreading across her face. "I can't believe it. I was just thinking about you last week, wondering if you ever finished your research." She looked him up and down, and her smile faded slightly. "You look tired, son. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" David laughed, but it came out bitter. "Define proper meal, that bad, huh?" Grace's eyes were full of concern. "Listen, you helped me out when I was in trouble. Now it's my turn. You're coming to dinner at my house tonight. No arguments." "Grace, I couldn't possibly—" "I said no arguments." Her voice was firm but kind. "Besides, I've been wanting to pay you back for that tire. You wouldn't deny an old woman the chance to show some hospitality, would you?" David hesitated. He really should just get on the road, start the drive back to Boston and whatever awaited him there. But the truth was he was exhausted, emotionally drained, and the thought of a home-cooked meal and friendly conversation sounded like heaven. "Okay," he said finally. "Thank you. I'd like that." Grace's house was about 20 minutes away, a modest home on the reservation with a well-kept garden and a porch that wrapped around the front. As David pulled up behind her truck, he noticed how peaceful everything felt. The sun was starting to set, casting that golden light across everything. Inside, the house smelled amazing. Grace immediately got to work in the kitchen while David sat at the table, and she refused his offers to help. "You're a guest," she insisted. "Just sit and rest." As she cooked, they talked. David found himself opening up in a way he hadn't with anyone in months. He told her about his funding getting cut, about how his research wasn't going anywhere, about how he was questioning everything he'd spent the last 5 years working toward. Sometimes, Grace said, stirring a pot on the stove, we think we're looking for one thing, but life has something else in mind for us. You came out here to study us, to write about culture and tradition, but maybe that's not what you were really meant to find. Then what was I meant to find? David asked, feeling lost. Grace smiled mysteriously. Maybe you'll know when you see it. Dinner was incredible. Traditional Apache dishes that David had never tried before, flavors that were completely new to him. As they ate, Grace told him stories about her life, about her late husband, about raising her children on the reservation. She talked about the challenges her community faced, but also about the strength and resilience of her people. Then, as she poured coffee after dinner, her expression changed. She got this thoughtful look on her face, like she was weighing something important in her mind. David, she said carefully, can I ask you something personal? Sure, he said, though he felt suddenly nervous. Are you married? Do you have a girlfriend back home? David blinked, caught off guard by the question. No to both. I've been so focused on my research that I haven't really had time for relationships. He laughed awkwardly. Why do you ask? Grace set down her coffee cup and looked at him with those wise, knowing eyes. Because I've been thinking about you a lot since that day you helped me. Thinking about what kind of man stops to help a stranger, what kind of man spends his own money, time he doesn't have, to make sure someone else gets home safe. Grace, really, it was nothing. She held up a hand. Let me finish. I have 3 children. 2 sons who are married with families of their own, and a daughter. Her name is Christina. She's 29, teaches at the school here on the reservation. She's smart, beautiful, kind, everything a mother could hope for in a daughter. David had no idea where this was going, but he was starting to feel very uncomfortable. Christina is having trouble finding someone, Grace continued. Not because something's wrong with her, but because good men are hard to find, especially here. The young men her age, most of them left the reservation for opportunities elsewhere. The ones who stayed, well, they're not right for her. And she refuses to settle. Grace leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. You're seeking a wife? My daughter is perfect for you. David nearly spit out his coffee. I what? Grace, I wasn't actually seeking. You said you don't have anyone. You're a good man. You're educated. You're respectful. And whether you know it or not, you're looking for something more than what you have. Grace's voice was gentle but insistent. Just meet her. Have coffee with her. If there's nothing there, fine. But what if there is? David's mind was racing. This was crazy. This was like something out of a movie. People didn't do this anymore. Arrange meetings between strangers like some kind of matchmaking service. Besides, he was leaving, going back to Boston. His life was there, even if it was falling apart. But another part of him, a part he hadn't listened to in a long time, was curious. What did he have to lose? His dissertation was a disaster. His career prospects were bleak. He had no relationship, no real connections back home except his disapproving parents and his frustrated advisor. One coffee, Grace said, tomorrow afternoon. That's all I'm asking. David looked at this woman who had somehow reappeared in his life at exactly the moment when he needed someone to believe in him, who was offering him something he didn't even know he wanted. Okay, he heard himself say, 1 coffee. Grace's face lit up like she'd just won the lottery, and David sat there wondering what on earth he'd just agreed to, and why his heart was beating so fast. David barely slept that night. He'd found a cheap motel about 15 miles away, the kind with thin walls and a flickering neon sign that buzzed all night. He lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. This was insane. He'd agreed to meet a complete stranger because her mother thought they'd be a good match. It was like stepping back in time 100 years. What would he even say? How do you have a normal conversation when you both know the only reason you're meeting is because someone's trying to set you up? By morning, David had convinced himself to cancel. He'd call Grace, make up some excuse, and just get on the road to Boston. But when he picked up his phone, he couldn't do it. Something stopped him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the fact that Grace had shown him such kindness. Or maybe, deep down, he just didn't want to go back to his empty apartment and failed dreams quite yet. He showed up at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. It was a small place in the nearest town, locally owned, with mismatched furniture and art from local artists on the walls. David ordered a black coffee and sat at a table by the window, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. At exactly 2 o'clock, the door opened. David looked up and felt his breath catch. The woman who walked in was striking. Not in a magazine model way, but in something deeper. She had long black hair that fell past her shoulders, warm brown eyes, and a confident way of moving that suggested she was completely comfortable in her own skin. She wore jeans, a simple blue shirt, and turquoise jewelry that looked handmade. When she spotted him, she smiled, and David felt something shift in his chest. "You must be David," she said, walking over. "I'm Christina, and I'm so sorry about my mother." David stood up, nearly knocking over his coffee. "Hi, yeah, I'm David, and, no need to apologize?" Christina sat down and laughed. It was a genuine laugh, not forced or polite. "Yes, there is. My mother has been trying to set me up for the past 3 years. You're just the latest victim, though I have to say, the story about how you helped her was pretty convincing. Either you're actually a decent person, or you're a very good con artist." Despite his nervousness, David found himself laughing too. "I promise I'm not a con artist, though I'm starting to think your mother might be. She basically ambushed me with this." "That's her specialty," Christina said, flagging down the waitress. "She's subtle as a freight train. Let me buy you another coffee as an apology for being born to such a meddling woman." The awkwardness that David had feared never materialized. Within minutes, they were talking easily, like old friends catching up. Christina had a sharp wit and a way of putting him at ease. She asked him about his research, and, unlike most people who glazed over when he talked about anthropology, she was genuinely interested. She asked smart questions, challenged some of his assumptions, and shared her own perspectives on cultural preservation. "The problem with a lot of academic research," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee, "is that it treats us like museum exhibits, like we're this fascinating culture that needs to be documented before we disappear. But we're not disappearing. We're adapting, evolving, living our lives. We're not artifacts." David felt a jolt of recognition. That was exactly what had been bothering him about his own work, but he'd never been able to put it into words. "You're absolutely right. I think that's why my dissertation is failing. I've been studying people instead of connecting with them." "So connect," Christina said simply. "Stop taking notes and start listening. Stop observing and start participating." They talked for 2 hours. The coffee shop started to empty out as afternoon turned to evening. David learned that Christina had left the reservation for college, got her teaching degree at Arizona State, and then shocked everyone by coming back. Most people who left didn't return, but she felt called to teach the children in her community. "They told me I was wasting my degree," she said, "that I could make more money, have more opportunities somewhere else. But this is my home. These are my people. If everyone who gets an education leaves, who's going to make things better here?" David found himself admiring her deeply. She had a sense of purpose he'd been searching for his whole life. While he'd been chasing academic credentials and publishable papers, she'd been doing actual meaningful work. "What about you?" Christina asked. "What are you going to do now? Your funding is gone, your dissertation isn't working. So what's next?" It was a fair question, and David didn't have a good answer. "Honestly, I don't know. I guess I go back to Boston. Try to salvage something from this research, maybe get a teaching job somewhere if I'm lucky. The whole doctorate thing might be over." "And is that what you want?" Christina's eyes were searching his face. "That life? Teaching at some university, writing papers that 3 people will read?" "I thought it was," David said slowly. "But lately I'm not so sure anymore." They were interrupted by the waitress politely letting them know the shop was closing. David was shocked to see it was already 6 o'clock. Time had completely disappeared. As they walked outside, the sky was painted in shades of pink and orange. The air had that perfect temperature that only exists in the desert at sunset. "So," Christina said, turning to face him, "this was actually not terrible. My mother might be onto something for once in her life." David smiled. "Yeah, it was pretty great, actually. Would you maybe want to do this again? I'm supposed to leave in a couple days, but I could stay a bit longer." "I'd like that," Christina said, and the way she looked at him made David's heart race in a way it hadn't in years. As he drove back to his motel that night, David realized something had fundamentally changed. He'd come to Arizona to study a culture, to write a dissertation, to advance his career. But maybe, just maybe, he'd found something much more important. He'd found someone who saw the world differently than he did, someone who challenged him, inspired him, and made him want to be better. He thought about Grace's words from the night before. Sometimes we think we're looking for one thing, but life has something else in mind. Maybe she was right. Maybe his research was never meant to be the point. Maybe it was just the road that led him here, to this moment, to this person. David pulled into the motel parking lot, turned off his car, and sat there for a moment. His old life was waiting for him in Boston. Failure, disappointment, and uncertainty. But here, in this unlikely place, something new was beginning. Something that scared him and excited him in equal measure. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Christina. "Thank you for today. Same time tomorrow?" The reply came almost immediately. "Absolutely. And David, I'm glad you stopped to help my mother that day." David smiled at his phone like a teenager. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt hope. Real, genuine hope for the future, whatever that future might hold. The couple of days David had planned to stay turned into a week, then 2 weeks. He kept telling himself he'd leave tomorrow, but tomorrow kept getting pushed back. He and Christina saw each other every day, and each meeting only made him want to see her more. Christina showed him parts of the reservation that tourists never saw. They hiked through canyons where her ancestors had lived for generations. She pointed out plants and explained their traditional uses, some for medicine, some for food, some for ceremonies. David listened with genuine fascination, not as a researcher taking notes, but as someone learning from a friend. One afternoon, they climbed to a spot overlooking the entire valley. The view was breathtaking, miles and miles of desert landscape stretching to the mountains. They sat on a flat rock, sharing sandwiches Christina had packed. "I used to come here as a kid," she said. "Whenever things got hard, whenever I felt lost or confused, I'd climb up here. Something about seeing everything from up high made my problems feel smaller." "Do you still come here?" David asked. "Sometimes. Less than I used to. Adult problems don't get smaller with a better view." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Teaching is harder than I thought it would be. The kids face so much. Poverty, family problems, addiction in their homes. I try to give them hope, show them they can have a future. But sometimes I wonder if I'm making any difference at all." David looked at her profile, the way the wind moved her hair, the strength and vulnerability mixed in her expression. "You are making a difference. I can see it in how you talk about them. Those kids have someone who believes in them. That's not nothing." Christina turned to him and something passed between them, a moment of real connection, beyond the surface. "You get it," she said softly. "Most people don't. They think I'm wasting my life here." "Then most people are idiots," David said, and Christina laughed. They stayed up there until sunset, talking about everything. Their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. David told her about the pressure he felt from his parents, who'd immigrated from Taiwan and sacrificed everything so he could have opportunities. How he felt like he was failing them by not becoming the successful professor they'd envisioned. "You're not failing them," Christina said firmly. "You're finding your own path. That takes more courage than following someone else's plan." Another day, Christina invited him to watch her teach. David sat in the back of her classroom and watched her work with third graders. She was patient and creative, making learning fun. When one boy struggled with reading, she didn't push him. Instead, she sat with him, found ways to connect the words to things he cared about. David saw the moment the kid's face lit up with understanding, and he understood why Christina had come back. After school, as they walked to the parking lot, Christina asked, "So what did you think? Still think I'm wasting my degree?" "I think you're exactly where you're supposed to be," David said honestly. That evening, Christina took him to meet some of her friends. They gathered at someone's house, and David was nervous about being the outsider. But Christina's friends were welcoming. They joked around, told stories, and slowly David relaxed. He realized this was what he'd been missing in his research. He'd been so focused on studying culture from the outside that he'd never just experienced being part of a community. One of Christina's friends, a guy named Thomas who worked as a mechanic, pulled David aside at one point. "So you're the guy Grace set Christina up with," he said with a grin. "We've been taking bets on how long you'd last. Christina usually shuts these things down by the second meeting." "Really?" David tried not to sound too pleased with himself. "Yeah, man. The fact that you're still around means something. She doesn't waste time on people she's not interested in." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "Just don't hurt her, okay?" She's been through enough. David wanted to ask what he meant by that, but Christina called him over and the moment passed. Later that night, after everyone had left and they were sitting on the porch under a sky full of stars, David asked her, "Thomas said something tonight about you going through stuff. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but I'm here if you do." Christina was quiet for a long moment. "I was engaged once," she said finally. "About 3 years ago, to a guy I met in college. He was Apache too, from a different reservation. Everyone thought we were perfect together. He promised we'd come back here, that we'd build a life in the community." She paused and David waited. But after graduation, he changed his mind. He got a job offer in Phoenix, good money, corporate world. He wanted me to come with him. Said we could visit the reservation on holidays. When I told him I wanted to teach here, wanted to come home, he called me naive. Said I was throwing away my future for people who didn't appreciate it. Her voice got quieter. He left, broke off the engagement over a text message. Said I had to choose between him and this place. "Christina, I'm so sorry," David said. "Don't be. He showed me who he really was. Better to find out before the wedding, right?" She turned to look at David. "That's why I was so skeptical when my mom tried setting me up. I figured any guy interested would either want to change me or would leave eventually." "I don't want to change you," David said, "and I'm not going anywhere." The words came out before he'd really thought about what they meant. But as soon as he said them, he knew they were true. Christina searched his face in the starlight. "You're supposed to go back to Boston. Your life is there." "What life? A failing dissertation and an empty apartment?" "Christina, I've been more alive in these past 2 weeks than I've been in the past 5 years. David, you barely know me. You can't just throw away everything because of some vacation romance." "This isn't a vacation romance," David said, his voice intense. "I know it sounds crazy. I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never felt this way about anyone. You make me want to be better. You make me want to do work that actually matters." Christina's eyes were shining. "This is insane. You realize that, right? People don't do this. They don't just completely change their life plans because they met someone." "Maybe they should," David said. "Maybe sometimes you meet someone and you just know." "Know what?" Christina whispered. "That they're worth changing your plans for." The space between them seemed to shrink. The night sounds of the desert surrounded them, crickets and distant coyotes. And then Christina was kissing him, and David was kissing her back, and nothing else mattered. When they finally pulled apart, Christina was laughing and crying at the same time. "My mother is going to be unbearable about this. She's going to say she knew all along." "She probably did," David said, grinning. "She seems pretty wise." "She's also probably watching from the window right now," Christina said, and they both turned to look at the house. Sure enough, a curtain moved. They laughed together, and David felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like he was home. Not the place he grew up, not the city where he went to school, but here with this woman in this moment. This was home. The future was uncertain. He had no idea how he'd make it work, what he'd do for a living, how he'd explain this to his parents or his university. But for the first time in his life, David wasn't worried about having all the answers. He just knew that whatever came next, he wanted Christina by his side. And judging by the way she was looking at him, like he was the answer to a question she'd been asking for years, she felt the same way. The honeymoon phase lasted about another week before reality started creeping in. David's phone began ringing constantly with calls from his university. His advisor left increasingly frustrated voicemails. His parents, who he'd been avoiding, finally got through to him one morning. "David, what is going on?" His mother's voice was tight with worry. "Your professor called us. He said you've disappeared. You're not answering emails. You missed your last committee meeting." David was sitting in his motel room and he suddenly felt like a kid being scolded. "Mom, I'm fine. I'm just working through some things." "Working through things? You're supposed to be finishing your doctorate, not working through things. Your father and I didn't sacrifice everything so you could throw away your education." Her voice cracked. "We left everything behind in Taiwan. We worked terrible jobs. All so you could have opportunities we never had. And now you want to just quit?" The guilt hit David like a physical weight. His parents had worked in restaurants, his dad as a dishwasher and his mom as a waitress, despite being educated professionals in their home country. They'd done it all for him, and here he was, considering walking away from everything they'd given him. I'm not quitting, Mom. I'm just figuring out what I really want. What you want? David, we don't always get to do what we want. We do what we must. We fulfill our responsibilities. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer but somehow more cutting. Is this about a girl? Your advisor mentioned you've been in Arizona for weeks now. David's silence answered for him. Oh, David. His mother sighed. You're throwing away your future for a girl you just met? This is not like you. You've always been the smart one, the responsible one. After the call ended, David sat on his bed feeling sick. Maybe his mother was right. Maybe he was being irresponsible, selfish even. He thought about all those nights his parents had worked double shifts. How his dad's hands had been raw from washing dishes in scalding water. How his mom had smiled through customers' rudeness because they needed the tips. When he met Christina for lunch, she took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. Talk to me, she said. David told her about the call, about his mother's disappointment, about the guilt crushing him. Christina listened quietly, her expression growing more troubled. She's not wrong, Christina said finally. You do have responsibilities. Your parents did sacrifice for you, and I would never ask you to abandon that. You're not asking me to. I'm choosing to. But are you really choosing, or are you running away from something that got hard? Christina's voice was gentle but firm. David, I care about you. These past few weeks have been incredible, but I can't be the reason you give up on your dreams. My dreams. David laughed bitterly. Christina, writing a dissertation that nobody will read was never my dream. It was my parents' dream. My advisor's dream. I've been going through the motions for years and I didn't even realize it until I met you. Then finish it, Christina said. Go back to Boston. Complete your doctorate, not for me, not for your parents, for yourself, so you never have to wonder if you could have done it. David stared at her. You're telling me to leave? I'm telling you that if this is real, if we're real, then we can survive a few months apart. But if you stay now, you'll always resent me. You'll always wonder what you gave up, and I can't live with that. The conversation left David feeling even more confused. That afternoon, he went for a drive just to clear his head. He ended up at that same spot where he'd first helped Grace on the side of the road. He parked his car and stood there looking at the empty highway. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his advisor. David, we need to talk. Your dissertation can be saved, but you need to come back now. Don't throw away 5 years of work. Then another text, this time from Thomas, Christina's friend. Hey man, heard you're dealing with some heavy stuff. Just remember, whatever you decide, make sure it's what you want, not what anyone else wants. Life's too short to live someone else's dream. And finally, a text from Grace. Come by for dinner tonight. Both of you. We need to talk. David drove to Grace's house that evening with a knot in his stomach. Christina was already there, and the tension between them was obvious. They barely looked at each other. Grace noticed immediately. Sit down, both of you, she said, her voice taking on that tone that meant she was about to say something important. They sat at the kitchen table, and Grace brought over coffee. She sat down across from them and looked at David with those wise eyes that seemed to see right through him. You're thinking about leaving, she said. It wasn't a question, David nodded. My university needs me back. My parents are disappointed, and Christina thinks I should go finish my doctorate. And what do you think? Grace asked. I don't know what I think anymore. I just know that I'm tired of disappointing people. My parents, my advisor, and now probably Christina too. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said something David didn't expect. You know what I see when I look at you? I see a young man who's been trying so hard to be what everyone else needs that he forgot to figure out what he needs. Grace, I have responsibilities. Of course you do. We all do. But responsibility doesn't mean ignoring your own heart. She turned to Christina. And you. You're pushing him away because you're scared. You're scared that if he stays, he'll end up like the last man who promised to stay. You're scared that you're not worth someone changing their life for. Christina's eyes filled with tears. That's not. It is, Grace said gently. You've been protecting yourself for 3 years. And I understand why. But you can't protect yourself from hurt by pushing away everyone who gets close. She looked between them both. Here's what I think. David, you should go back to Boston. Not because you're running away from Christina, but because you need to finish what you started. You need to prove to yourself, not your parents or anyone else, that you can complete this doctorate. But do it fast. and do it with the understanding that your life is waiting for you here. Grace, David started, I'm not done. Christina, you need to trust that not every man who leaves comes back different. Some of them come back stronger. Some of them come back knowing exactly what they want. And if David is the man I think he is, he'll come back for you. What if he doesn't? Christina whispered. Then he was never the right person and you'll survive it, just like you survived before. Grace reached across the table and took both their hands. Love is a risk. It always has been. But the biggest risk is not taking the chance at all. Later that night, David and Christina drove out to their spot overlooking the valley. They sat in the car, neither speaking for a long time. I don't want you to go, Christina finally said. I don't want to go either, David replied. But she's right. I need to finish this or I'll always wonder. And I can't build a future with you while running from my past. Christina nodded, tears streaming down her face. How long? 3 months, maybe 4. I'll work like crazy. I'll finish this dissertation, defend it, and get my degree. And then I'm coming back, you promise? Her voice was small. I promise, David said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Christina, I've spent my whole life doing what other people expected, following the path that was laid out for me, but you've shown me what it means to choose your own way, and I choose you. I choose this. But first, I need to close that old chapter properly. They held each other in the car under the vast Arizona sky and made promises. David would finish his doctorate. Christina would keep teaching, keep making a difference in her students' lives. And in 3 months, they'd start their life together. It sounded simple. It sounded like a plan that could actually work. But both of them knew that 3 months apart was a long time. Long enough for doubts to creep in. Long enough for distance to change feelings. Long enough for everything to fall apart. As David drove back to his motel that night, he looked at his phone. A text from Christina. I believe in you, and I'll be waiting. David saved that text. He'd need it in the hard months ahead, because finishing his dissertation while his heart was 1,000 miles away was going to be the hardest thing he'd ever done. The drive back to Boston took 3 days, and every mile felt like David was leaving a part of himself behind. He'd packed up his motel room, said goodbye to Grace, and held Christina for what felt like hours before finally getting in his car. The last image he had was of her standing in her driveway, trying to smile through tears, waving as he pulled away. Boston in early spring was cold and gray, the complete opposite of Arizona's warmth. David's apartment felt even emptier than he remembered. Dust covered everything. His plants had died. The place smelled stale and unlived in. It was depressing, but David didn't let himself wallow. He'd made a promise, and he intended to keep it. The very next morning, he met with his advisor. Professor Wilson looked at him over his glasses with an expression somewhere between disappointment and curiosity. Well, Mr. Chen, you've finally decided to grace us with your presence. I know, and I apologize. But I'm back now, and I'm ready to finish this. Are you? Wilson leaned back in his chair. Because 3 months ago you were lost. Your dissertation was unfocused, your research scattered. What's different now? David thought about how to explain it. I understand what I was missing. I was studying culture from the outside like it was something dead to be examined. But culture is living. It's about people, connections, relationships. I want to rewrite my entire approach. Wilson raised an eyebrow. That's a massive undertaking. You have maybe 4 months before the deadline? I can do it, David said with a confidence he actually felt. I know exactly what I need to say now. And he did. For the first time since starting his doctorate, David had clarity. He rewrote his dissertation from scratch, but this time with heart. He wrote about what he'd learned not just from interviews and observations, but from actually connecting with people. He wrote about Grace's wisdom, about Christina's commitment to her community, about what it means to preserve culture not as a museum piece but as a living, breathing thing. He worked 12, sometimes 14-hour days. He barely slept. He lived on coffee and determination. But the work didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt meaningful. Every night, no matter how tired he was, he video called Christina. Sometimes they'd talk for hours, other times just 10 minutes if she was exhausted from teaching. Those calls were the only thing keeping David sane. How was your day? Christina would ask, and David would tell her about his progress, about meetings with his committee, about small victories in his research. How are your students? David would ask, and Christina would light up, telling stories about breakthroughs and challenges. But as weeks turned into months, the strain started to show. "I miss you," Christina said one night, and there was an exhaustion in her voice that went beyond physical tiredness. "I know it's only been 6 weeks, but it feels like forever." "I know. I miss you too. But I'm making good progress. My advisor actually said the new draft is strong." "That's great," Christina said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "What's wrong?" David asked. Christina hesitated. "Nothing. I'm just tired." But David could tell it was more than that. Over the next few calls, Christina seemed more distant. She was shorter in her responses, less enthusiastic. When David asked about it, she denied anything was wrong. Then one night, David called at their usual time and Christina didn't answer. He waited an hour and tried again. Nothing, he texted. No response. A cold fear settled in his stomach. He tried not to panic, told himself she probably just fell asleep early or her phone died. But when she finally called back the next morning, David could hear something in her voice. "I'm sorry about last night," she said. "I just needed some space." "Space?" "Christina, what's going on?" "I don't know if I can do this, David." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "This long-distance thing, it's harder than I thought it would be." David's world tilted. "We talked about this. We knew it would be hard, but it's only for a little while longer." "Is it, though? Even if you finish your doctorate, then what?" "You'll need to find a job. And how many universities are near the reservation?" "None. So either I uproot my life for you or you give up your career for me. Either way, someone loses." "That's not true." "We can figure it out, can we?" Christina interrupted. "David, I have students who depend on me. I have a community here, and you have your career, your family's expectations. Maybe we're just from two different worlds that can't mix." "Don't say that. You're the one who told me to come back here and finish. You said if this was real, it could survive distance." "I know what I said. But David, do you know what it's like? Watching all my friends move on with their lives while I'm waiting for someone who might never actually come back. Thomas just got engaged. Rachel is pregnant with her second child. And I'm here alone telling myself that in a few more months maybe you'll be back. Maybe. I will be back. I promised you." "People promise a lot of things," Christina's voice broke. "My ex promised too. He promised we'd come back here together. He promised the reservation would be our home. And then he got one taste of life in the city and everything changed." "I'm not him," David said, frustrated. "How many times do I have to prove that?" "Maybe you can't prove it. Maybe I just have to decide to trust you, and I don't know if I can do that." The call ended badly, both of them upset and nothing resolved. David tried calling back, but Christina didn't answer. He sent text after text, each one going unanswered. 3 days passed. The worst 3 days of David's life. He couldn't focus on his dissertation. He couldn't sleep. He kept checking his phone every few minutes, hoping for a message that never came. Finally, on the 4th day, his phone rang. It was Grace. "She's struggling," Grace said without preamble. "She's scared, David. Scared that she's investing everything in something that might not work out." "Can you blame her?" "No," David said quietly. "But I don't know what to do. I'm 2,000 miles away. I can't exactly drive there right now. My dissertation defense is in 6 weeks. I know. And she knows that too, logically. But emotionally, she's protecting herself the only way she knows how, by pushing you away before you can hurt her. How do I fix this?" Grace was quiet for a moment. "You keep your promise. You finish that dissertation, you get that degree, and you come back. Words are easy, David. Actions are what matter. Show her that you're different. Show her that you're worth the risk." That night, David sent Christina a long email. He poured everything into it. He told her he understood her fear, that he'd be scared too if he were in her position. He told her about his progress on his dissertation, about his plans for after graduation. He told her he loved her, even though they hadn't said those words out loud yet. "I can't promise that everything will be perfect," he wrote. "I can't promise that figuring out our future will be easy. But I can promise that I will come back. Not because you're waiting for me, but because you're what I'm coming back to. You're not a detour in my life, Christina. You're the destination." He hit send and waited. Hours passed, then days. No response. David threw himself back into his work with even more intensity. If he couldn't have Christina right now, he could at least honor his promise by finishing what he'd started. His dissertation came together piece by piece. His committee gave positive feedback. His defense date was set. 2 weeks before his defense, David's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Christina. Just 3 words. I'm still here. David's hand shook as he typed back. I'm almost done. 6 weeks and I'm coming home. Home? Christina replied. Wherever you are. David typed. That's home. There was a long pause. Then okay, finish strong. I'll be waiting. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. They still had issues to work through. But it was hope. And right now, hope was enough. David's defense day arrived. He stood in front of his committee, presented his revised dissertation, and answered their questions with a clarity and passion he'd never had before. When they asked him about his future plans, David didn't hesitate. I plan to continue working with indigenous communities, but not from an ivory tower. I want to do practical work, consulting, advocacy, actually helping rather than just studying. I've learned that the most valuable research comes from genuine relationships, not detached observation. Professor Wilson smiled. Well, Mr. Chen, I'm pleased to inform you that your committee has voted unanimously. Congratulations, Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen, he'd done it. After 5 years, countless setbacks, and nearly giving up, he'd finished. David walked out of that room, and the first thing he did was call Christina. I passed, he said when she answered. He heard her intake of breath. You did it. David, I'm so proud of you. I'm coming home, David said. I mean it. I'm packing my car tomorrow and I'm driving straight to Arizona. We have a lot to figure out, but we're going to figure it out together. Together, Christina repeated, and David could hear the smile in her voice. I like the sound of that. As David hung up and walked out of the university building, he felt lighter than he had in months. He'd kept his promise. He'd finished his doctorate. And now finally he could start the life he actually wanted, with the woman who'd shown him what really mattered. The drive back to Arizona felt completely different this time. Last time, David had been running away from failure. This time, he was running towards something. Towards someone. The landscape that had seemed so foreign to him a year ago now felt familiar, welcoming even. As he crossed into Arizona, he felt like he could finally breathe properly. He'd texted Christina when he was an hour away. She was waiting at Grace's house when he pulled up, and the moment he saw her, all the stress and doubt of the past months melted away. She ran to him and he caught her, spinning her around like in some cheesy movie. But it didn't feel cheesy.
It felt right. You actually came back, Christina said, half laughing, half crying. Did you really doubt it?
David asked. Maybe a little, she admitted. Old habits. Grace came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel and trying to hide her smile. Well, Dr. Chen, I guess you proved us all wrong. The first few days were perfect. David stayed in a motel but spent every waking moment with Christina. They talked for hours, making up for lost time. They hiked their favorite trails, ate at the little restaurant in town, and just enjoyed being together without a screen between them. But on day 4, reality started to intrude. David was having coffee with Christina when she asked the question he'd been dreading. So what's the plan? You're here, which is amazing, but you can't live in that motel forever, and you need a job. Have you thought about what comes next? David had thought about it. He'd thought about little else during the drive. I want to stay here, near you, near the reservation. I want to do consulting work with indigenous communities, help with grants, cultural preservation projects, education programs. I've been researching organizations that do this kind of work. That's great, Christina said, but he could hear the hesitation in her voice. But David, you know jobs like that are hard to come by, right? And they don't pay much. You have student loans, I'm guessing? About $80,000 worth, David admitted. Christina's eyes widened. And you want to do nonprofit work? That's going to be really tight financially. I know it won't be easy, but I didn't come back here to be rich. I came back to be happy. Happy doesn't pay bills, Christina said gently. Trust me, I live on a teacher's salary. I love my job, but I'm not going to pretend money doesn't matter. It does. It was their first real disagreement since he'd returned, and it stung. Over the next week, more practical concerns emerged. David applied to several consulting positions but heard nothing back. His savings were running low. The motel was expensive. He started to feel the weight of his decision. Then his parents called. David had been putting off telling them the truth about his plans. He'd said he'd graduated, which made them happy. But he hadn't mentioned that he was back in Arizona with no job and no plan to return to the academic world they'd envisioned for him. David, we need to talk about your future, his father said. I have a friend whose son works at a think tank in D.C. He can get you an interview. It's perfect for someone with your degree. Dad, I appreciate it, but I'm not interested in moving to D.C. There was a long pause. Then what are you interested in? You have a doctorate now. You should be using it. I am using it. I'm going to work with indigenous communities, help with cultural preservation and education. That's volunteer work, not a career, his father said, his voice getting harder. David, we didn't sacrifice everything so you could play at being helpful. We did it so you could have security, stability, a real profession. This is a real profession, David argued, but his confidence was wavering. And where will you live while pursuing this profession? Are you coming back to Boston? No, I'm staying in Arizona. Another pause, longer this time. The girl. This is all because of that girl your advisor mentioned. Her name is Christina, and yes, she's part of it. But it's not just about her. It's about me finally figuring out what kind of life I want to live. What you want. David, when did you become so selfish? His mother had taken the phone and she sounded close to tears. Your father and I worked ourselves to exhaustion. We never got to do what we wanted. We did what we had to do for our family. That's what responsible adults do. The call ended with David feeling crushed. Christina found him sitting in his car outside her school, head in his hands. They think I'm throwing my life away, he told her. And maybe they're right. I have no job, no real plan. I'm living in a motel eating my savings. What if I can't make this work? Christina got in the car and sat with him. Do you want to go back to Boston? No, David said immediately. Then stop letting other people's fear make your decisions. Yes, this is scary. Yes, it's uncertain. But David, you're not the same person who left here 4 months ago. You finished your doctorate while your heart was somewhere else. If you can do that, you can figure this out. But doubt had planted itself in David's mind. Over the next 2 weeks, things got harder. He applied to job after job with no responses. His student loan payments would start soon. He and Christina had their first real fight when she suggested he consider temporary teaching positions at universities, even if it meant being apart again. I didn't come all this way just to leave again, David said, frustrated. And I don't want you to resent me when you're broke and miserable, Christina shot back. I've been the reason someone gave up their dreams before, David. I won't do it again. They barely spoke for 2 days after that fight. David felt like everything was falling apart. He'd given up his old life but couldn't seem to build his new one. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe he'd been naive and impulsive. Then Grace called him over for dinner. She made his favorite meal, the same one she'd served that first night. After they ate, she looked at him seriously. You're doubting yourself, she said. Shouldn't I be? Nothing is working out like I thought it would. Life rarely does. But you know what I see? I see a young man who had the courage to choose his own path, who finished what he started even when it was hard, who came back even though it would have been easier to stay away. That's not someone who makes mistakes. That's someone who builds the life they want brick by brick. But what if I can't support myself? What if I can't be the partner Christina deserves? Grace smiled. You know what Christina needs? She needs someone who doesn't give up. Someone who keeps trying even when things are hard. She doesn't need you to be perfect or rich or have all the answers. She needs you to be present and committed. Can you do that? David thought about it. Yes, I can do that. Then stop worrying about everyone else's expectations and start living your life. That night, David sent out 5 more job applications. But this time, he didn't just apply to the prestigious positions. He applied to small nonprofits, community organizations, even administrative roles if it meant he could stay and do meaningful work. 3 days later, he got a call. A small nonprofit that worked with tribal communities across the Southwest needed an education coordinator. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough. And more importantly, the work was exactly what he wanted to do. David got the job. He found a small apartment near the reservation. It wasn't fancy, just a 1-bedroom place with outdated appliances, but it was his. He slowly started building his life. Christina helped him move in, and as they unpacked boxes, David looked around at his new home. It was so different from what he'd imagined his life would be. He'd thought he'd be a professor at some prestigious university, living in a nice condo, publishing papers. Instead, he was in a small Arizona town working for a nonprofit, living in a modest apartment, and he'd never been happier. Thank you, he said to Christina. For what? You moved your own boxes, she teased. For believing in me. Even when I didn't believe in myself, Christina kissed him. That's what love is, isn't it? Believing in each other's best selves. It was the first time either of them had used the word love out loud. It hung in the air between them, both terrifying and thrilling. I do love you, David said. I think I have since that first coffee date. I love you too, Christina replied. Even when you're being stubborn and impossible. They stood in his empty apartment holding each other, and David realized something. He'd thought coming back to Arizona was about winning Christina. But really it was about becoming the person he was meant to be. Christina had just helped him see it. A year and a half had passed since David first helped Grace on that empty highway. Now, on a warm Saturday morning, he stood in Grace's backyard wearing a traditional Apache ribbon shirt that Grace had made for him. His hands were shaking slightly as he adjusted his collar for the 10th time. "Stop fidgeting," Thomas said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You look good, man." David and Christina had talked about marriage for months before he proposed. They'd discussed everything: where they'd live, how they'd blend their lives, what kind of ceremony they'd have. Christina wanted something that honored her Apache heritage, while also including David's Chinese background. His parents had finally agreed to come, though David could tell they were still processing everything. The ceremony was beautiful, and unlike anything David had imagined when he used to think about getting married. They'd combined Apache traditions with Chinese tea ceremony elements. Grace had helped plan everything, moving between the two families like a bridge, helping them understand each other. When Christina appeared, walking toward him with her father, David forgot to breathe. She wore a traditional white Apache dress decorated with intricate beadwork, and she'd never looked more beautiful. Her father placed her hand in David's, and the elder conducting the ceremony began to speak in Apache, then English. David's vows were simple but heartfelt. "A year and a half ago, I stopped to help a stranger on the side of the road. I thought I was just changing a tire, but really I was changing my entire life. Christina, you've taught me what it means to live with purpose, to choose meaning over comfort, to be part of something bigger than myself. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the gift your mother gave me when she said, 'My daughter is perfect for you.'" There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. Even David's stoic father wiped his eyes. Christina's vows made David cry. "I spent 3 years protecting my heart, building walls so high that nobody could hurt me again. And then you came along, this awkward researcher who didn't know the first thing about my culture, but was willing to learn, who saw me not as a charity case or an exotic adventure, but as a partner. You gave up everything familiar to build something new with me. That kind of courage deserves the same courage in return, so I promise to trust you, to build our life together and to never stop believing in us." The celebration afterward was a blend of both cultures. Chinese lion dancers performed alongside Apache dancers. There was traditional fry bread and Chinese dumplings. David's mother had insisted on a tea ceremony, and Christina's family had graciously participated, even though they didn't fully understand it. At one point during the reception, David found himself standing with Grace, watching Christina laugh with her students who had come to the wedding. "You did this," David said to Grace, "all of this. If you hadn't suggested that coffee date—" "Oh, stop," Grace interrupted, but she was smiling. "I just opened a door. You two were the ones brave enough to walk through it. I still can't believe you set us up. That's such an old-fashioned thing to do," Grace laughed. "Sometimes old-fashioned wisdom works. I saw something in you that day on the highway, a good man who needed a purpose. And I knew my daughter needed someone who saw beyond the surface. Sometimes a mother just knows." David's own mother approached them. She'd been quiet most of the day, clearly out of her comfort zone. But now she stood in front of Grace and said something in Mandarin, then in English. "Thank you for taking care of my son." Grace took her hands. "He's part of our family now, which means you are too." Watching the two mothers from completely different worlds connecting over their shared love for him and Christina, David felt emotion overwhelm him. This was what he'd been searching for all along. Not academic success or publications, but connection, family, belonging. Later, as the sun began to set and guests started to leave, David and Christina stood at the edge of the property, looking out at the desert landscape that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" Christina asked. "Giving up the academic world, disappointing your parents, all of it?" David thought about the prestigious career he'd abandoned, the university office he'd never have, the published papers and conferences and professional respect he'd traded away. Then he thought about his job working with tribal communities, helping preserve languages and traditions. The students Christina taught who now knew him as Mr. David, the community that had welcomed him. The woman beside him who was now his wife. Not for a second, he said honestly. This is the life I was meant to live. I just needed a push to find it. More like a strong shove from a meddling mother, Christina joked. They laughed together and David pulled her close. He thought about how different his life would be if he hadn't stopped that day. If he'd driven past Grace and continued on his original path. He'd probably have finished his dissertation eventually, gotten some teaching position at some university, lived a comfortable but unfulfilled life. Instead, he had this. A wife who challenged him, a community that had adopted him, work that mattered, a mother-in-law who'd seen potential in him that he hadn't seen in himself. 6 months later, Christina told him she was pregnant. David cried happy tears and immediately called Grace, who whooped so loud he had to hold the phone away from his ear. His parents were cautiously excited, though his mother immediately started worrying about hospital access and whether the reservation had good medical facilities. When their daughter was born, they named her Grace May Chen. Grace for Christina's mother, who had brought them together. May meaning beautiful in Mandarin for David's mother. It was a name that bridged both worlds, just like their daughter would. The first time David held his daughter, looking down at her tiny face, he thought about the man he used to be. The one who measured success in publications and credentials. Who was more concerned with career advancement than human connection. That man felt like a stranger now. Grace, the elder Grace, visited them in the hospital and held her namesake with tears streaming down her face. You know what I see when I look at this baby, she said. I see proof that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. You stopped to help an old woman with a flat tire, and look what came from that one good deed. David thought about that often in the years that followed. How a single decision to pull over, to help someone in need had led to everything good in his life. How Grace's matchmaking scheme, which had seemed so crazy at the time, had been exactly what both he and Christina needed. He thought about it when little Grace took her first steps in their modest home. He thought about it when Christina got promoted to principal of the reservation school. He thought about it when his parents finally relaxed and started genuinely enjoying their visits to Arizona. His mother teaching her granddaughter Chinese while Grace taught her Apache. He thought about it when his father pulled him aside one visit and said quietly, I was wrong about you. I thought you were throwing your life away, but I see now that you were building the right life. I'm proud of you, son. David had started that journey thinking he was searching for something to complete his dissertation, but what he'd really been searching for was a place to belong, a purpose that mattered, a family that chose him as much as he chose them. And he found it all because one day, on a lonely stretch of Arizona highway, he chose to be kind to a stranger. Years later, when people asked David and Christina how they met, they'd smile at each other before telling the story. I stopped to help her mother change a tire, David would say. And my mother decided I was perfect for him, Christina would add. Was she right? People would ask. David would look at his wife, at the life they'd built together, at their children playing in the yard while Grace watched them with joy in her eyes. He'd think about the community that had become his family, the work that gave him purpose, the unexpected path that led him home. Yeah, he'd say, taking Christina's hand. She was absolutely right. Because sometimes the best things in life come from the chances we take, the strangers we help, the doors we walk through even when we're afraid, and the wisdom of a mother who knows that true wealth isn't measured in prestige or salary, but in love, connection, and the courage to build a life that matters. David had come to Arizona as a lost graduate student looking for research subjects. He left as a man who understood what really mattered, and then he came back, not as a researcher but as someone coming home. And all of it started with a simple act of kindness on a hot Arizona afternoon, when a young man decided that helping a stranger was more important than staying on schedule. Sometimes the detours we take become the main road. Sometimes the people we help end up saving us, and sometimes a mother's intuition about her daughter's perfect match turns out to be exactly right. David Chen would spend the rest of his life grateful for that flat tire, that highway, and that moment when he chose compassion over convenience, because that choice gave him everything: a wife, a family, a home, and a life filled with meaning. And it all started with 3 simple words from Grace Blackfeather. "My daughter is perfect for you." She was right. Christina was perfect for him, and he was perfect for her. Sometimes love finds us in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes all it takes is a kind heart, an open mind, and a mother who knows exactly what her daughter needs.